Hello everyone, it's Martin aka Anders, and with Masters now underway for every region around the world, this computing competitive is going to be doing a little bit of catch up. In today's video, we're going to take a look at Stage 1, Challengers 3 for EU. Let's jump right into it. In keeping with routine, we'll start this one off with the map statistics. In this event, EU showed quite a bit less dramatic shifting compared to their NA counterparts. Haven comfortably held on to its top slot, increasing ever so slightly from 25.5% during Challengers 2 up to around 27.5% here. Ascent also held on to its spot in the pecking order, albeit decreasing in the same proportion that Haven increased, going from around 25.5% down to 23.5%. Moving on to this third slot is where we do see the 1 point of change for this event, with Bind and Split switching positions. Bind swinging from just under 18% in Challengers 2 up to north of 23.5% here is the most dramatic shift that we see in this pool. And then rounding out the pack we have Icebox, which despite already being at the bottom, managed to lose a little bit more of its share, dropping from 7 to 5%. Overall, a really interesting dynamic in Europe here, at least compared to North America's shift between Challengers 2 and Challengers 3. In NA, we saw a massive surge in Icebox play rate, whereas EU, it seems a lot more par for the course, the dynamics almost completely unchanged. That will do us for the map stats though, so let's shift over to agents. Starting out with these agent pick rates, it's very similar to the maps in that there isn't dramatic change. We still have Omen at the very top of this pecking order at just shy of 77%, dropping ever so slightly from his 78% in Challengers 2. And below him we have Sova, who shifted barely more than half a point, still in that 71% bracket. Next up, we do have one of the major shifts, and I may as well cover this slot and the next in tandem because I think they're wholly related, and that's Raze in the third slot, Jet in the fourth. In Raze's case, we see a downswing of just about 5%, from 70% down to 64.5% here. And on the other side of that coin, we see Jet surging from 50.5% up to 55.25%. This is a cool little paradigm shift between the two dive agents that we have available in the game right now, where we see that little backswing towards Jet, despite the fact that in the recent past, EU has shown an ever-increasing favor towards Raze. And that's almost assuredly going to be driven by teams like Razor Edge, now Ascend, where with CNED as their primary spear point, someone who's notorious for their Jet gameplay, keeping him in his comfort zone is just going to be the correct decision 9 times out of 10. Moving away from the diving duelists though, we land on Cypher at a clean 50% pick rate, and below him we have Sage holding strong at around 41%. Sage seemingly holding a very comfortable spot in the European metagame. If we look over at North America, Sage did make a bit of a recent surge, but it was driven by the fact that we saw a really dramatic uptick in Icebox presence in their map pool. In EU, that's very much so not the case. We just saw that, if anything, Icebox's play rate is receding, so to see Sage retaining such a high presence in their metagame shows a really intriguing dynamic to the way that EU tends to play. It speaks to their preference for a more slow, defaulty style, where Sage and their other priority pick in Raze get a lot of value out of catching opponents with counter timings and stalling out explosive pushes. This is something we've known for a long time though. It was really only during Challengers 1 that we saw it ebb back a little bit, but it's been back since Challengers 2 and seems very much so here to stay. Following Sage, we'll have Killjoy coming in at 38.8%, down pretty significantly from where she was in Challengers 2. There seems to be a bit of an ever-present battle where from one tournament to the next you'll see a 5% swing or so between Killjoy and Cypher, and it's just a constant back and forth. Following Killjoy, we'll have EU's poster boy in Breach coming in at just shy of 33%. More or less where he's been, a little bit of a drop, but it's one of those situations where I'd be pretty surprised to see any dramatic shifts up or down for Breach in the region. Following Breach is where we see that significant fall off for pick rate, really representing us leaving the established metagame, and that will land us on Brimstone at just shy of 20%. While Brimstone's been performing really well when we've seen him in these mid-rangey post-plant-centric comps like those run by Wave and Fnatic, he's yet to grapple any significant meta share. Following Breach, we have the pick that was really my highlight of this event, and that is the massive upswing in Phoenix play rate from not even 4% to north of 17%. The story of Phoenix in EU's meta is really one of the underdog. Obviously, he's never been a staple of EU's more prevalent metagame, but it's been these Turkish teams, these Polish teams, these sort of under-the-radar, fast-paced, highly aggressive rosters that have been pulling him out. You've got teams like Chakalaka and Ballista who brought him out in this Challengers and really found a fair amount of success. In the latter's case, enough to get them through to Masters. Something I'll definitely want to keep an eye on moving forward is whether or not Phoenix and this higher tempo playstyle takes more of a grip in Europe. Below Phoenix we have Reyna with an effectively unchanged play rate, just around 1.5% uptick. Below her we have Skye, who saw just about the same amount of swing but downward. And second to last we have Viper coming in at 6.5%, down fairly significantly from her just shy of 11%. This is one that I kind of blame on the decrease in Icebox play rate. Obviously, a 2% downtick in map presence isn't a ton, but where Viper has such a selective pick rate to begin with, I do think that her prevalence on Icebox in particular, any amount of downswing in that map is going to lead to a proportional decrease in Viper presence, and so I think it's a little bit understandable here. Rounding us out, no one's going to be surprised here, Yoru is still immensely struggling to find any place in the metagame, although he does more than double his play rate from around 0.5% up to 2%, and we can thank Rix for that. Moving over to compositions, we have the second event in a row where Breach is conspicuously missing from the majority of these comps. Despite Breach appearing in almost a third of all setups, we see him in only the top comp here, meaning that if we saw him, it was almost always in this comp or in a comp that appeared very infrequently and was likely a one-off. Obviously, we see him in that top comp of Cypher, Raze, Omen, Breach, Sova. This is really the penultimate comp in terms of representing this region. Everything about that screams Europe. The Raze prioritization over Jet, the utilization of Breach, it is about as European Valorant gets. Moving down to that second slot, we have another prototypically European setup with Killjoy instead of Cypher, that continued Raze prioritization, but now we have Sage over Breach. The third slot will be a carbon clone of that with a simple Sentinel swap out. In the fourth slot, we'll have Flashless Double Dive, something that has had a fairly significant meta presence really in every region around the world now. And in the fifth slot, we have a comp that really makes you stop for a second and makes you double check which region you're looking at. It is the purest form of North American Standard with Cypher, Phoenix, Omen, Jet, Sova. And that will perfectly transition us to our composition of the event because it is exactly that. As I frequently discuss compositional diversity, I don't think that there has been a comp mix from a single event up until now that makes my points more potently than this one does. We have a European event where we see all of the hallmarks of European Standard, but then still within the top 5, we see a comp that has quite literally been cherry-picked from the top of the North American meta. There hasn't been a single event since beta where you could point out this same sort of phenomenon happening over in NA. You haven't, and likely won't for a while, see a Breach Raze Standard setup over in the NA top 5. This comp showing up so prevalently in EU is a great sign moving into Masters 2 and the LAN in Reykjavik, because EU is getting reps on international styles. These Polish teams, these sort of out-of-the-blue rosters that not a lot of people have a read on, are coming in with a very North American explosive style and are catching a lot of teams off guard, which is great. They're being caught off guard now by it so that they can have these weaknesses shored up by the time they get to international competition. If we look at NA for comparison, there really isn't a lot of this to go around. You've got FaZe finally taking an off-meta approach, but outside of them, who do you really point to? It's certainly not any teams that are making deep runs into challengers. Whereas you look at EU and we've got Chakalaka that's made a pretty significant run with it. We've got Ballista running it who's now going to Masters. The number of teams in the region who are getting a broad exposure to this comp and this style isn't comparable to the level of diverse exposure that teams across the Atlantic are getting. At the time of making this video, we've had 2 days of European Masters, and obviously Ballista's fairy tale run has come to an end at the hands of Heretics. Nonetheless though, it still stands that they made a phenomenal effort with a composition that is really stylistically and just all around not something that's endemic to the European way of play, and so it's giving the region an opportunity to test its mettle against something that they realistically wouldn't have had to otherwise see until Masters 2. I don't really expect to see a lot of spice and innovation during Masters, but it will be awesome to look at the interim period between Masters 1 and Masters 2 and whether or not we start to see this diversification of styles over in North America, where you are going to be looking at the top 5 comps from an event and say, okay, here's the standard NA comps, but there's a comp that looks like it was plucked straight out of EU. Only time will tell, but we've got some awesome Masters matches still to come in the meantime. Alright, that will wrap us up for Challengers 3 over in Europe. Obviously, Masters is already going on and in full swing. I'm catching every single one of those matches that I possibly can. Wish there was a little bit more broadly available co-streaming rights so we could watch through these together, but you know what? We take what we can get, and Masters has been insane so far. Hope you guys are enjoying this content, all of my coverage of the Challengers events, and I would love to hear down in the comments below. Although I'm super busy with the collegiate team and the NA Pro-Am team that I coach, is there a particular region that I'm not covering right now that you guys would love to see? Obviously, it's been a bit of a back and forth between NA and EU thus far. Would you maybe like to see some Brazil, some Korea, maybe even Japan? I'd love to add a little bit of perspective, but specifically the perspective that you guys want to see. Would love to hear that down below, and I will do my best to find the time to make it a reality. Per the usual, if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.